Good morning or good afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in, and welcome to the second of our series of our October ISM Lunch and Learn webinars. Today we're going to be looking at the Sage 100 purchase order module in depth with our presenter, Mrs. Ty Duncan Whitcomb, excuse me. I've got a little cold here and my brain's not all together. A few orders of business before we get started. Phones will be in mute until the end of the presentation, which we will then open them up for questions. Also, I wanted to mention that we did attend a webinar at Sage taking a brief look at the upcoming Sage 100 2018 that's due for release later this year. Lots of new and interesting functions, so keep an eye out. Once that comes out and we're able to test, we will be starting up some new webinars to show you all of that. Sage also has released a Sage 100 C-Line product. It's basically the same as your Sage 100, however, it is subscription-based and it does come with a lot more bells and whistles on the user interface, and depending on your maintenance plan, it can come with a multi-bin light and a scan for a Sage Inventory Basics, Inventory Advisor Basics package. So they are currently having a promo until the end of the year where you can move over to that new 100 C-Line for no additional charges. If you're interested in learning more about that or just getting some information, please feel free to reach out to me at AM for Account Manager, am@goism.com. So with that, that's all of my news. I'm going to turn everything over to Ty. Ty, thank you and welcome everyone.
Hello and welcome to our Sage 100 Purchase Order webinar. We're going to be going over the new Purchase Order module in Sage. So what happened when the new version of Purchase Order came out, you now have the ability to actually retain purchase order history. You could not hold history before. You would have purchase orders, and as we all know, the purchase orders would stay out there for years on end. And now Sage has made it to where the purchase order can be held for, yeah, like I said, for years and years, and you now in the settings you have the ability to hold or retain and tell the system how many years of history that you are holding. So what is on the agenda today is we're going to be going over different items in Sage. I'm going to show you the new purchase order, show you obviously the history settings in purchase order. We're going to be going over the auto-generate purchase order from sales order, the reorder, the landed costs, what the purchase order actually history inquiry screen looks like. And then we're going to also be going over various purging utilities that are in the system. So when we go over the auto purchase order generate, if you are familiar with what Sage had called their old, and I'll spit out what I'm trying to say, their PO1020 mod, the PO1020 mod has been integrated into the new Sage 100 system. So with that integration of Sage, it now being part of the system, that is where we are now getting a lot of the auto-generate purchase order from sales order. So Sage is allowing that to be set up two different ways. You can either generate it from sales order, you can trigger the purchase order, or from purchase order, vice versa, you can now also do it from that standpoint also. So that's what Sage is now allowing us to be able to do in the system. So give me 1 second and I am going to open up my Sage system here for y'all so that y'all can see it, and we are going to go ahead and we are going to dive into that purchase order module. So let me bring up that screen and let's go ahead and get started. Give me 1 second. I'm having issues here for some reason. She had more than one. And let me know if you can see my screen. Can y'all see my screen here?
Ty, I can see your slides, your purchase order slides.
All right, then. Give me 1 second. I need to show you my Sage. Figured out why. It's showing my application and it's not showing my system. So let's switch to that. Can you now see my screen? and see my Sage?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So let's go ahead and let's get dived into the system, and let's go ahead and look at what we have here. So what we're going to start with, first things first, is the purchase order module. All right. And in purchase order, I'm just going to take you briefly through the purchase order inquiry screen. So Sage in the system with the purchase order, like I was saying before, is you used to have the purchase order in the system, and you would have tons and tons and tons of purchase orders that were here in the system. What Sage has now done in the Sage system is now if you go into the purchase order options, you now have a new history tab over here, and you now have the ability here to retain your purchase order history. You can now tell it what you want to retain, whether it's the deleted orders. So if somebody enters a purchase order and deletes it, you can retain that information. Even you can, if somebody goes and creates an order, accepts it, and then goes back and deletes some of the lines off the purchase order, we can have the system even retain that deleted information. So in case a purchase order goes out the door, somebody goes and deletes the line, you receive the purchase order and it's more than what you anticipated, you now have the ability to find that information and figure out what is going on. And then here you can tell the system even by item and vendor. You can tell the system how long you want to retain that purchase history for in the system. Where you have the ability in the system to go back and look at that information in the system, we will go through that here shortly a little bit later, and I'll show you how that information looks in the system. All right, let's go ahead and continue. So let's go through the purchase order auto-generate as I had said before. So you have two ways of triggering the purchase order auto-generate in the system, and where that information is set up in the system is set up here. So when I go into the system, in my purchase order options, let's just dive back into there briefly. You have this, what we have here is the Auto Generate tab. This is what was the old PO 1020 that has been now encapsulated into the Sage 100 product. Here you can tell the system whether you want to combine sales orders by vendor. If you don't, you can then have the ability to make the sales order number be the purchase order number, so it helps if you're trying to match purchase orders and sales orders together. And then here's all the different information that you can trigger in the system. Do you want to enable the purchase order generation in the middle of sales order entry? If you turn that off, then you would have to trigger the generation of that purchase order from the sales order in the purchase order module. But if you turn this feature on, you can now, while you're in a sales order, go ahead and click the button and have the system automatically generate that sales order for you. And then do you want to access the purchase order after every generation? Different features when you turn them on and off will change the different features for you in the system and how that system is going to be. So once that feature is turned on in the system, like I said, there's two different ways of doing it. I can come in here and just simply auto-generate from sales orders in the purchase order module. This is me just coming into the system, selecting a purchase order in the system that is out there, hitting proceed, and the system will automatically generate that sales order, that purchase order in the system for me based off of that sales order. Or if I just come into sales order in the system, and if I select items that have a primary vendor in the system, I can launch it from here also. So what happens is when I go into my sales order entry in the system and I launch that, and if I say, for instance, created a brand new purchase order in the system, and I'm going to just briefly go through here and set up a purchase order for a customer in here really quick, and select my lines. And let me make sure that this purchase order in here has a primary vendor. I'll assign it one since it doesn't have one. Right here in the system, here's where that new generate purchase order button is. So what would happen for this order is it would simply go through and generate that order in the system. In my case, it's not generating an order because there's quantities available, and depending on your setups, it generates the purchase order, whether you tell it to force the purchase order generation or whether if based on quantities, it will not automatically do that purchase order generation for you. But that generation button that you see here on the totals tab only shows up in the system based off of your setup features. So when I check that box to allow myself to generate those purchase orders from here, that's why it allowed me to do that. One of the commonly underutilized features that are in Sage that people don't use a lot, that I don't hear a lot of my customers using a lot, but it's a very powerful tool in the system, is this auto reorder selection. Where that auto reorder selection is and where it comes from, it is based off of the information that you put into item maintenance. So when you're in item maintenance in the Sage 100 system, and you set up all your inventory items and your parts in the system that you possibly would want to purchase. Over here on the Reorder tab, you have the ability in the Reorder tab to set up what your reorder methods are, whether they're the economic quantity, max stock levels, or you just have reorder points. Those are the features that you have in Sage, or you have none. But what it allows in the system is for you to put that information into the system of when stuff gets to a certain quantity in Sage, what triggers that reorder. So once this information is set up in reorder maintenance on an item by item basis, what that allows us to do in the system is come into this reorder selection feature that is in Sage, and at any given time I can go through the system and just run my reorder report and let the system come back and tell me, based off of that feature in the system, what does it think at this time that I should be reordering. Some people, if they're not using, say for instance, the Sage Inventory Advisor module in Sage that we have that links to our system, they could utilize this. It's very simple, obviously, but they have the ability to use the auto reorder report in the system. That auto reorder report, all it does is simply goes through and just based off of your reorder points in the system, it will go through and then suggest what things that I need to purchase in the system, whether I need it, whether I don't. So based off of this one, you can say it's giving me what my quantity sold, what my reorder points in the system are, what's my recommended order, and how much should I be purchasing. And this information is based off of the information that's in the system and different sales and stuff that are in the system. It will give me what those reorder numbers in the system need to be, matching the quantities that I already currently have on hand. So if I say yes to auto-generate these orders, what the system will do, it would then go through and automatically generate all those purchase orders in the system for me based off of that reorder report. And then I can go through, review all those purchase orders in the system. And if I decide that, yes, I want to go ahead and purchase those at this time, I can then go ahead and purchase those different various items at that time, based in the system, going back and looking at those purchase orders. So if I were to go into the Sage 100 system and start with that very first order, which was the number 8, you can see it generated 5 orders for me in the system. I now have 5 purchase orders that it thinks that I need to purchase, and I can go through and edit that. You're going to notice that it purchased multiple items, but it's for each of my different various warehouses that I'm needing to fulfill for the vendors that are assigned to that. So I can go through if I wanted to, if I knew there was other information that maybe I was missing, I can change these quantities before I actually submit to the vendors for these products. But it's going through and looking at all my warehouses and giving me the correct information. So I do have the ability to do reordering of inventory items if I use that auto reorder selection. I know a lot of people just simply do the inventory stock status report and they generate have their own internal reporting that they use to know when they need a repurchase. But if you use the reorder maintenance in Sage 100 and item maintenance and then couple that with the auto reorder selection, it might help you speed up the process a little bit that you currently do in the system. All right, so the next item that we're going to go through is landed cost. So landed cost in Sage is one of those ones that a lot of customers come to us on it that do a lot of shipping of containers, stuff that comes in from ports that need to be allocated and looked at. So if I go into the Sage system and if I need to actually account for landed cost, I first have to set up that functionality in the Sage 100 system. So in Sage, you have what we call the landed cost type maintenance, and you can set up however many different landed costs that you need it to be. So if this one, in essence, that Sage has out of the box that you can set up your own specific one, is for freight. And you can tell the system, how do you want to allocate that landed cost? Do you want to do it by weight? Do you want to do it by cost? Do you want to do it by quantity? Or do you want to do it by volume? So customers who, say, for instance, purchase items, say, for instance, I purchased 100 widgets from Indonesia, and there was landed cost that was associated with that item of $100. I would want to split that $100 cost over those 100 different widgets. So what Sage would in essence do is, when I receive those parts into my inventory during my receipt of goods transaction, the cost of the widget was $10. When it was all said and done, it would add that landed cost, and that widget was received into inventory with an $11 cost, so that my system can apply that cost across the product. But it also depends on how I'm telling it to allocate that cost. Some people choose not to allocate the cost of the part and just decide as a business that they're going to eat that cost and not recognize that cost. You recognize it on your books, but you're not going to pass that cost, I guess you can say, on to whoever you're going to end up selling that widget to. So I had talked about the purchase order history inquiry module with the new ability to track history in the system. So where that purchase order history now comes into is underneath the inquiries, you now have what we call here the purchase order history inquiry screen. And what would happen is now when you do a lookup, all these items, these cases are telling me these are active. A means they're active purchase orders, which means they're still waiting to be fulfilled. These are all the new ones that I created today. But in the system, as these items will close, I would either see a C here, which means that this would be a completed purchase order. But now once this order is closed, instead of me seeing these five purchase orders in the system, 10 years from now, it would only be showing here in purchase order history inquiry. It would not be showing in my purchase order, in my regular purchase order entry screen. And then this is what I was talking about right here. If it was an X, if that status had been X, that means the order had been deleted. But here you see there's this new column in here called deleted. So it would have shown the original purchase order. So if you can look at this part here, there's these two items here, and I'm going to show you what this looks like when I'm talking about the system has the ability to track deleted items. If I were to say, instance, go in and pull up purchase order number 10, and I'm just going to simply take this line and delete it and hit accept. And when I go back into my purchase order history inquiry and I pull up again that purchase order 10 in the system, and I must not have turned it on, but if I had turned on my deleted, track my deleted, it would have shown that the item had been deleted out of the system. And let me go back and look at that and see if I had turned that off. I think I might have. Yep, I told it not to track it. So let's say yes and yes, and we'll hit accept on that. So let's go back to our purchase order. And we'll pull up purchase order number 9. And let's go to the very top since there's a lot of orders in this one. And we're just going to delete the first few of this one. And then we're just going to delete this purchase order period. So now if I go back into purchase order history inquiry, in the system, and I look at my purchase order history inquiry, you're going to see the X, that's that purchase order number 8 that I deleted. So the system will now track if people put purchase orders in and then delete them after the fact. And then over here on my purchase order number 9, You see the X where I went through and deleted those original lines off the purchase order. So I can go back if I need to and track and see what people did in purchase orders if they had went through and deleted lines off of a original purchase order that, say for instance, it comes and hits your dock and you're like, well, these aren't on the purchase order. Well, now you have the ability to go back and look at that purchase order history inquiry and see if a purchase order has been tampered with. Another big feature of the system that people sometimes look at this item when it comes time when their purchase orders are kind of getting big or their system gets really large and the system is, you have underneath purchase order what we call our utilities menu. And you have the ability, if your purchase order starts getting, the history even gets too big, you can come through and start purging different items in the system. So you can purge completed purchase orders out of the system. You just simply tell the system, I want to purge out all my orders 990 days prior to a certain date, and the system will go through and delete all those purchase orders out of the system for you. Or you can purge obsolete purchase orders in the system. You can purge your purchase order history. So if once you start retaining your purchase order history, maybe you want to keep the system clean to maybe you only want to hold 2 years, you can just come in here and enter a date and the system will go ahead and purge all your history on or before that date in the system. And then you have other ones, the purging of history by item or vendor. You can purge your expired master and repeating orders. For people who create master orders or repeating orders in the system, those expire after a time. So if you negotiate a pricing with the vendor for the year to say if you purchase 1,000 widgets, this is the price, it's good for 2 years that you get it. Well, come year 3, you don't want to keep using that master order if it's no longer good. So you can have the system, if you've put a date in on those master repeating orders of when those expire, the system can go through and remove those out of the system to keep people from inadvertently using incorrect pricing as your pricing continues to change and evolve. One of the things that we had mentioned, but I can briefly go over it because it looks like we have a bit of time that's currently left in the system, is purchases order clearing is one of those things that we always talk about it, but people never really think about the purchases order clearing. So in Sage, you do have out of the box our purchases clearing report. I will say that now that we have the ability to retain history in Sage, it is a lot easier for us to reconcile this purchases clearing report, just because a lot of those orders, that even after you've completed purchase orders, sometimes if you don't reconcile out the items completely correctly, they will sit on your purchases clearing report for a very long time. Well, now that you have the ability to delete items off the purchase order so that you can close and complete them and clear them out and move them into history, a lot of people are finding that it's a lot easier for you to use that purchases clearing functionality that's now built in Sage, just because the history is giving you the ability to clean up that open purchase order list that has been very kind of difficult to clean up in the past. That was the last thing that we decided that we were going to go over regarding the purchase order module. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to Sherry for questions. And that is it for purchase order. If anybody has any questions that they would like us to go through, bounce Sherry. Sherry will open the lines and we'll go from there.
Okay, I'm currently opening the lines. If you did not enter your audio pin, it will send you a new audio pin so I can open your line. I checked the chat window. I'm not seeing any questions there. So if anyone has any questions, your line is currently open, or you can utilize the chat window in your control panel. I am seeing one question. Raul has said, is purge PO information truly deleted, or is it a redirected compressed file? Are you there, Ty? Oops, I guess
there we go.
Ty.
Sherry had me muted. All right. Yes, because of the way way that Sage History now works, when you purge that history is now truly purged. So if you are trying to purge off that history, you will need to either make a backup to a different company code and call that company backup, or whatever, however you want to label that 3-digit company code, and just simply say that this is a backup of your system as of a certain date, and then proceed to run that purge, because it will definitely purge that history. Yes.
Can the option to retain the info be available? Oh, he just said that you actually answered that, so thank you. Any other questions? Yes, I'm seeing Todd has a question. Is there a process or workflow for purchase order requisitions?
I can briefly go through that right now in the system for Sage. So for purchase order in the system, when it comes to a requisition, it's just simply create a purchase order in the system, and it's right here called material requisition. How Sage just simply handles it, it's just like a purchase order, it's just the screen changes in terms of it, and it also uses different general ledgers just because the system knows that you're keeping it internal. So you would put who it's requested by in the department. You would still utilize it just like you would a purchase order in the system, but the general ledgers that are used, or should I say that are used to reconcile, are different in Sage. So you would then make sure, and I'm trying to get to that right here. You see where it says this material requisition expense account? That is your offset for your items in the system. So when you purchase that inventory, this will be your offset. So it will come in to the system and your GLs that it's going to hit. So it won't go into inventory per se. It will go off to your material. The expense account that it will hit will be your material requisition. And then you would then go through and issue it out to your staff just like you would any other item that you would in the system. So whether you want to do a material issue in the inventory module to get it off your books so that it doesn't show those quantities anymore in the system. But is there a written up flow? Not necessarily is probably the best way to say it. The closest you're going to probably get to any kind of flow is if you come in to hit the question mark in purchase order for Sage, and right here it tells you how to enter a material requisition in the system, is probably the closest you're going to get to that information for you in Sage. And then you can also just search material requisition in Sage and then see what other things come back, but there is not really a written up document, I guess is probably the best way to say it. It just tells you how do you issue, and then how do you enter it, and then how do you go through and do your requisition issue, is just come here and you would just then issue out the inventory so that it goes off your books to show that, okay, now it's been issued to whoever requested it. But that's pretty much how the material requisition works in Sage. Hopefully that answers your question.
Let's see, I believe we have another question. He said, okay, thank you. It does answer the question. Those are all the questions that I'm seeing. Please note that if something does come up, you can always reach out to me at account manager, so that's am@goism.com. Keep an eye out on our schedule. We've got some great webinars coming up, and as I mentioned, we will be developing a What's New in 2018. And if you're interested in or just curious about Sage 100C, please reach out. I've got some information I can send you to take a look, pre-recorded webinars. And of course, this, as all of our ISM Lunch and Learn webinars, will be posted up on our YouTube channel. So thank you, everyone. Ty, thank you for a great presentation. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.